Hello, friends. Reverend Beth Simmons here with a midweek moment. So yesterday, December 3rd, was the International Day of Persons with Disabilities. And I was considering posting on our social media accounts some kind of recognition of the day, something to share that we affirm the worth and dignity of people with disabilities, that you are welcome in our church, ways to advocate. But I hesitated because it felt to me like virtue signaling. And if you are not aware of what that term means, virtue signaling is an alliance, like aligning yourself with a certain view or political or social stance that is popular or popular in a certain circle with which you want to be associated. This can include, very often it's on social media, but it can also include wearing certain items of clothing or jewelry or putting a certain bumper sticker on your car, something to let others know that you are aligned with a certain point of view in the world. Whether or not, and this is particular, I think, with virtue signaling, whether or not you've actually done anything for that particular cause or, to support a particular marginalized or oppressed group. And I find that, I have talked recently, about churches who become open and affirming and don't really do the work to become an actually welcoming and affirming place for the LGBTQIA+ community. That rainbow flag on such congregations or the welcoming statement is virtue signaling. It is the same thing as, for instance, putting a Black Lives Matter sticker or flag out without actually doing any work towards racial justice or racial reconciliation. And for me, although we are a church that has done some work towards accessibility, I feel like we have to do more. And I didn't want to just post something to make us seem like we were aligned with the right kinds of people or to make us seem virtuous, right? This is why it's called virtue signaling. Or, I don't know. I think we have to tread a fine line. And I think some people will argue with me and say that I am asking too much, that you have to be perfect and you have to do all these things, and that's not at all. I just want to be careful. And I think this particularly happens with more progressive churches. And maybe often, and I'll offer just a gentle critique of my tradition, because I'm in the tradition and I feel like I can do that, of the United Church of Christ, is that we very quickly jump into throwing out things, responding to events or to justice issues very quickly with what is expected of us without taking time to consider how, like, the work that we're actually doing and whether we are actually being helpful or somehow influencing justice or speaking out and with folks that are dealing with these issues or are marginalized in some way. Here's another example, and I want to take ownership that we have sort of done this somewhat. Land acknowledgements. Land acknowledgements have become sort of a very popular thing. At least in New Hampshire, you can go to various museums, public spaces, and they have land acknowledgement. There are towns and different organizations within towns that have adopted land acknowledgements. I have heard it in churches, and it had included sometimes included in the service, sometimes included in the bulletin, somehow, acknowledging that the land that they are on, used to be the land of an indigenous people who are still here, but the land is no longer theirs because it was taken by colonizers. On the one hand, I think it's really important that we know that and that we acknowledge that, particularly that it continues to be unceded. Like it's still stolen. We haven't given any of it back. We haven't engaged in reparations, none of that. On the other hand, just saying that and acknowledging that without working towards some kind of reparation, reconciliation, justice, advocacy, it's very empty. It just, again, signals virtue, signals our alignment with the right side, right? Or the correct way of being in the world. A certain, if you want to use the word wokeness, without actually influencing for good the folks on whose land we are on, right? So we have not adopted a land acknowledgement in our congregation. We don't put one in a bulletin. We don't say one at the beginning of the worship service. And this is why. I have considered it because I think it's important, and I have mentioned multiple times. I think by now my congregation actually can tell you exactly who the original inhabitants of our land were, which I think is great and important. And at our recent brunch church, where we were sort of honoring Thanksgiving and doing a Friendsgiving and giving gratitude, as part of our litany of Thanksgiving at the beginning, which we sort of borrowed from a format of the Haudenosaunee people. I think I said that wrong, and I apologize. Haudenosaunee. See, this is part of the recent part of what we need to work on. If I can't even say that word of the traditional tribe, right? Anyway, and I did a land acknowledgement as part of that, and recognized not only the harm done, but the harm that continues. And I think that's important, but that's pretty much where we have stopped. We have not, as a congregation or as me as a pastor personally, reached out to any elders or folks in the Abenaki community to engage in conversation or education. And so we will not be adding a land acknowledgement to the beginning of our service anytime soon. And so I think just simply throwing up a Canva image on the International Day of Persons with Disabilities to be like, hey, look, we care about people with disabilities. That is absolutely true. Absolutely. And we welcome people with disabilities in our congregation. We have people with disabilities in our congregation. And we are working on being accessible. We have a lift. We just recently took out a couple of partial pews to make more room for bigger sized bodies and mobility aids. We are working on, considering for the not too distant future, updating our audio system so that we have better hearing assistance. Our bulletins are all printed in a larger font to make it easier to read. And that's good. All of those things are good. And I often make sure that our videos are captioned when I post them online, and that we have image descriptions and video descriptions as much as possible. But we are not working to advocate for marriage equality, for instance, for people with disabilities. The fact that if you are receiving governmental benefits or assistance because of your disability, that disappears if you get married. You can't get a higher paying job without losing critical assistance. So basically, if you make even a tiny bit over a certain threshold, you actually become poorer because you lose government assistance. You can't have more than a certain amount of money in savings without losing your assistance. And some folks went, well, if you can work, you can earn a certain amount of money, you don't need assistance. Have you been to the doctor lately? Because healthcare is expensive. Even if you have a job that has insurance and good insurance, it's still really expensive. And so a person with disabilities who generally, not all disabilities, but most disabilities need extra care, medical care of some sort, medical, physical, mental, extra appointments and medicines and all kinds of things that are expensive. And that assistance is really helpful with that. And that doesn't go away just because you are able to work or you get married. So that's important. And pay equity and job availability equity, right? Like lots of companies don't want to hire people with disabilities. And so there's all these issues, right? And I'm not saying that we have to constantly advocating and doing in order to say that we are aware of these issues of justice. I just think we have to be careful about just saying we're aware or that it's important without doing any of the work at all. So I don't want the church to become a place of virtue signaling where we, come February, fill our social media feed and our sermons with stories and images based on African Americans and the Black community and the African diaspora, just because it's Black History Month. We should, be doing that all the time because, Black people are always part of our communities and our lives, and not just limited to February. But also, again, it just feels a little inauthentic, especially if that's the only time we mention it and we do nothing beyond just preaching a sermon about it or just posting an image on social media to say, look at us, ooh, how woke we are. I'm not asking for perfection. I don't think perfection is an expectation of anybody. I just think that we need to back up our social media posts and our sermons and our flags and stickers and whatever that we hang up in our congregations, in our churches, with some tangible reflection and education and advocacy. So I would urge you on this day after the International Day of Persons with Disabilities to do a little research. Do some research about wage equality or inequality, about marriage inequality, about the access challenges that folks face. If you are not currently disabled, you can do a lot of research, and I encourage you to do so. You can ask some folks with disabilities, especially if you are part of a church, ask can you access our church? What would make our church more accessible? Don't expect folks with disabilities to do all the work for you. Don't ask them to educate you constantly, but do listen for their voice, right? So, and then do more education, because people have written books and there's lots of disabled content creators that you can follow and learn from. And like I've said before, support monetarily for their labor. Anyway, this is This is becoming a long video, more than a midweek moment, I suppose. But anyway, I just had that on my heart and mind. So I just caution all of you against virtue signaling, and make sure that when you are sharing a story or posting on social media or wearing a t-shirt or something, that you've got something to back it up, and that you're not just doing so to make others think that you are on the correct path, or that you are aligned with a certain way of thinking, without actually having done any of the work. All right, I'm going to step off my soapbox now. Thanks for listening if you stuck this far, and I wish you a wonderful rest of the week. This coming Sunday is the second Sunday of Advent, and it is our Sunday of Peace. We are continuing with our Journey of Stars and Wonder. If you are in New Hampshire or in this region and you want to come for a little indoor stargazing, we're taking a trip. We've got a private planetarium show scheduled for 4 p.m. on Sunday afternoon, so you can check out our Facebook page or our website to find more information about that and to join us. And we're almost halfway through Advent, and we are well into this journey of hope and longing and expectation, and of the prophets' cries for justice. Have a wonderful rest of your week, folks. Be well.